Good afternoon, welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, as you know, today we have another lecture on research method. In the last lecture we discussed the basic meaning of research, different elements of research, and we'll also talk about how research is conducted. Today we'll move further and we'll talk about the methods of research, and there are various sampling and sampling and survey. We will talk about the survey and sampling today, and for discussion on this very topic we have in the studio Dr. Rajan Kumar. He is assistant professor in School of International Study in Jawaharlal Nehru University, and his area of research is research method and international affairs. So on your behalf I welcome Dr. Rajan Kumar for EduSet lecture on this very topic. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. My topic today is survey, and I would like to know that I would like to tell you that there are three types of researches that you do. One is empirical, second is normative, and then you have philosophical. But empirical research is one of the most important researches that you do, and for empirical research you need data, and there are different sources of data. One can be archival, second can be experimental, and then third can be survey data. So there are different kind of surveys also. One is opinion poll, second is social media such as Facebook, YouTube, email, and telephonic surveys. And there are certain concepts that you need to learn if you want to do a survey. First is sampling. Second is, of course, sampling is part of survey, so you need to know the survey and sampling. And in sampling you need to understand different types of sampling that you have. One is simple random sampling, second is stratified, and third is cluster sampling. So these are different methods of sampling that you need to learn, and once you have done the survey, once you have done the sampling, you need to understand, you need to know how to analyze the data. For analyzing the data there are different techniques, and that we'll learn in today's lecture. And finally there are certain critiques of survey method. There are people who argue that that survey method is not very useful in getting to the reality, getting to the valid picture of the research. So there are certain critiques, and towards the end of this lecture we'll learn about the critiques of the survey method that we have. First I need to explain what is survey and what is sampling. Survey is a method to collect information about attributes of a group of people, and examples are opinion polls, marketing survey. So these are some of the methods through which you do this survey. And sample is a selection of a set of people out of population for survey to make inferences about a larger group. And when you do sampling, and when you try to make inferences on the basis of sampling, the process from sampling to survey is known as that's the inductive process. In logic you might have learned that there are two methods of making inferences. One is inductive and the second is deductive. So inductive method is one where you go from particular to general, and the deductive method is one where you go from general to particular. In this case, because as you know that in this case we go from sample to population, so we want to know the attributes of the population, but we do not have time, we do not have resources to go and interview all the persons. So in that case what you do, you select a sample, and on the basis of the results of and the outcomes of the sample, you try to predict about the entire population. So that process, the process of predicting on the basis of sample about the population, that process is known, and that process is, as you saw, that process is inductive process. So the inferential process here is inductive, not deductive. Now important thing to understand is that why do we do survey? One of the most important things that we learn from the survey, because this is a replica of the population, attributes of the population or the group of people that you want to study. So in that replica you can get the exact behavior of the entire population, you can get the exact preferences and interest of the entire population just on the basis of surveying a small sample. So for that, survey becomes very important. Second is it's a very parsimonious way of collecting vast information on some variables. because if you go one-to-one, it takes a lot of time. You cannot interview all the persons. You cannot meet all the persons. That's practically impossible. So in that case, what you do is that you prepare a questionnaire and distribute the questionnaire to do a survey. So that's a very parsimonious way of collecting vast source of information on some variables that you have, and it's useful for teleological and descriptive study. Teleological studies are those kind of studies where you try to establish the causation, the relationship between the cause and the effect. So for that teleological study, the survey is very important. And if you're planning to do a descriptive study, so for that also this sampling and the survey method could be very important, because in descriptive method you'll know the attributes. You have the factual information about the person you are interviewing, then you have the attitudinal data about the person that you're interviewing. So for descriptive study, this survey method is again very useful. And keep in mind that in survey you are having a huge sample, a sample of a good number of people. So that can provide you a very good source of reliable and unbiased kind of data. So that is very useful for the research, the empirical research that you do. So as I told you that there are three kind of researches normally that you do. First is empirical, second is normative, and third is philosophical. For empirical research, you need survey and the data. So for empirical research, survey and sampling are very, very important. Then I would like to tell you about the types of survey. So there are different types of survey. One is known as cross-sectional survey, and the second is known as a longitudinal survey. In the cross-sectional survey, the interviewer or the investigator will collect data to make inference about population at one point in time. The crucial thing to remember here is at one point in time. Survey, in this kind of survey, you do not go across the time period. What you do is that you do a survey for one particular time. For example, if I am interested in knowing the dengue cases in Delhi in 2012, so for that I need to know how many people suffered from this disease in 2012 in a particular city of Delhi. But if you're planning to do a longitudinal survey, so in that case you have to have repeated observation of the same set of variables with the same set of people also. So for example, if I want to know the level of violence in 1970s, 1980s and 1990s in Delhi, so in that case I'll have to have the data of 1970s, I would like to have the data of 1980s, and then I have to have the data of 1990s, so that I can compare these 3 decades and the violence in these 3 decades. And if I'm planning to do a longitudinal kind of data, if I'm planning to do longitudinal kind of survey, so we have to understand that there are 2 kind of surveys. One is cross-sectional, where you have to study just at you do survey at just one point in time, and second is longitudinal survey, where you study for a repeat, you observe a certain event for a repeated period of time. Sometime for a very long time, for example in 1970s, 1980s and 1990s. And the panel data or the longitudinal data that you get, that can give you a wider source of information, that can provide you a detailed information about that particular variable and how that variable had changed over the time. So there are certain advantages and disadvantages of the 2 kind of data that you have. But it's quite possible that in many of the cases that you do, the longitudinal data is not available. For example, if I want to know the cases of dengue or malaria in Delhi, for example, it's possible that I do not have the data for 1960s, I do not have the data for 1970s. So in that case, I'll not have any choice but to depend upon cross-sectional data. So these 2 types have to be understood when you're planning to do a research which is based on survey, and especially when you're trying to collect the empirical kind of data. The next thing to be understood is that there are certain survey techniques, and techniques are very important, because if you do not use the right technique, probably your data might be biased, and that might bias the complete result. The first thing to understand is face-to-face interview. This is one of the most traditional methods of doing survey, and here the researcher will go and meet the person individually, will meet the person himself or herself. Here the problem here is that you have to take an appointment with that person, you have to meet that person, you have to give time, because you cannot train it's very difficult to train the investigator to do the research on the part of you. if you are planning to do face-to-face interview. In face-to-face interview, you have to go and meet the person. You have to talk to that person with the questionnaire or without a questionnaire, but the meeting in person is very important here, because only then you can have face-to-face interview. The second is the structured or non-structured questionnaire. Here, instead of meeting face-to-face, and sometimes it's not difficult to meet face-to-face, so what you can do is that you can prepare a questionnaire in advance. So you prepare a questionnaire, and then there are two methods: either you employ the investigator, or you go and do you distribute the questionnaire yourself. Depending upon the time, resources, and your convenience, you can either do it yourself or you can employ the investigators. If you're planning to collect a huge set of data, in that case, it's very important. It's very important to employ investigators. You can have as many investigators as you want, and then train the investigators and send the investigator to with the questionnaire to do the survey. So that's with that method, you can collect a lot of data for your research. So and then I'll come about the structured and non-structured. I'll define these two patterns later in the lecture. But before that, I would like to explain you the focus group. Face-to-face was one-to-one. In the structured and non-structured questionnaire, you can employ the investigator or you can do it yourself depending upon your convenience and time. But the third method is the focus group. In the focus group, what you do is that you invite some set of people or a certain group of people on a table, and you ask them to discuss a topic. You throw a topic in the discussion, and then they discuss among themselves. The advantage here is that that you will know the kind of public posting that the people take. Keep in mind that people when you talk to a person in private, so that person might give you a different kind of opinion, or he might be more revealing. But when it comes to taking the position in public, that the same person may not be willing to share the information that the person shared you when he talked to you in private. So if you want to know the public posting or the objective or the kind of position that a person wants to take in public, so for that you need to have a focus group discussion. And in many of the surveys, I have seen that most of the people, instead of taking just one method or two methods, what they do is that they employ a variety of methods, or sometimes it's a combination of methods rather than just one method. So many of the people will have face-to-face interviews. They'll also have a structured and non-structured questionnaire interviews, and they also have focus group discussions. So with all these three, the chances are that you can minimize the biases in the research and the biases in your data. So these three methods will go one by one. The first is first thing to understand is questionnaire, how to formulate a questionnaire, and what are the different types of questionnaire, and what is the format of a questionnaire. The first type of information that you need. If you've seen any survey done by some research organization or by a researcher or by a scientist, you'll find that there are some factual information at the top. First, a person or the surveyor or the researcher would like to collect the data on the factual information. And among the factual information, you need to collect data on the name, sex, age, place, etc. And in the factual information, sometimes names are important, but if you are collecting information on a very sensitive kind of data, for example, if you want to know whether a person was involved in violence or not, or if you want to data on whether a person was involved in crime or not, or if you want to collect data on, say, AIDS, or some sexual preferences. So in these cases, it's possible that the respondent is not willing to share the information with you. So in that case, it's better that you do not ask the name of the person, because once you ask the name of the person in the questionnaire, so that person becomes very conscious. And once a person becomes conscious, the person may not giving you the real inside picture. So that's the disadvantage that you have if you're asking the name, asking the person to name in the survey. When I was doing a survey for my research in one of the countries, Russia, so I was surveying on ethnicity and conflict in Chechnya. Chechnya is one of the provinces of Russia. In that, when the Chechens were there where I was surveying, and I realized in my pilot survey that if I ask the name of the person is not willing to give any information, because that person is scared of the state. That person does not know me. He does not trust the investigator. So as a result, it becomes very difficult for those kind of interviews to get the real information. So if you think that names are important, you might ask the name. But if you think names may not be that important, I think it's better not to ask the name. But names can also reveal sometimes some of the name pattern or religion. So sometimes it can be important. So you have to decide whether you want to include the name in your questionnaire or not. But factual information is one of the basic things that you need to collect in any kind of survey. Factual information, as I told you, it can be name, age, sex, place, religion, country, state, etc. So these are some of the basic things that you need to collect in any survey. Second is behavioral kind of data that you need for in any survey. Here you need to know the preferences of a person, you need to know what kind of interest that person has, you need to know what are the regular activities, regular and habitual activities that the respondent is involved in. So for that you need to have a set of behavioral questions in your questionnaire. So without that you cannot test, you cannot know the attributes of the person, you cannot have the different behavioral patterns of that person. So first you had the factual information, second you have to have the behavioral information, and the next is attitudinal information. In any survey, if the survey is from the individual person, so you have to have attitudinal survey where beliefs and opinions are important. Keep in mind that the respondent is not willing to share the information on beliefs and opinions, and it comes out only when he develops a trust on you, and he's not frightened or he's not scared of you. Only then that person is willing to share his rigid belief or opinions. So you have to put a question, put some questions in your questionnaire which can test the attitudes, beliefs, and opinions of that person. So these are the three things that you have to have in all the surveys. And what are the question format? There are two types of formats that you can have in your questionnaire. One is the closed-ended format. In the closed-ended format, what you do is that you ask the question and then you give options. You can give 4 or 5 options. For example, I ask you that what is your income in 1 year. So I'll give you the option of 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 25,000. So in that case, I'm giving you 4 or 5 options, and you have to mark just one of them. So that is closed-ended because I am closing the options for you, and that's the reason it's called closed-ended, where the options are given by the researcher. Again, here one more thing to learn here is that sometimes the options are yes or no, and sometimes options can be in the Likert scale. In the Likert scale, where the choices are choices range from from a strongly agree to moderately agree to disagree and strongly disagree. So the difference that you see is that in the Likert scale you have it can be ordered from strongly agree to strongly disagree. So these kind of things can be useful, especially if you plan to do quantitative studies, and for this you need to have a structured kind of questionnaire. So there are different formats, and these are the formats related to closed-ended question format. And then you have open-ended. In open-ended, options are not given. You ask the question to a person. For example, I ask you that whether you support a democracy in a country or not. In that case, you can give your free answer that okay, you like some of the aspects of democracy in a country, but you can say that you may not like some of the other aspects of democracy in a country. So in that case, you are free to say whatever you want to say. I'm not giving you the fixed option of yes or no, or 4 or 5 options on a scale or without a scale. So and there are certain advantages and disadvantages of closed-ended and open-ended. In closed-ended, the options are limited, and options are decided by the surveyor, by the researcher. In the open-ended, the options are completely decided by the respondent. So these are the advantages and disadvantages that you have to understand when you are framing the questionnaire and when you are framing the questions. The next is I would like to explain what is a structured questionnaire and what are the ways to prepare a questionnaire which are structured. First is you have to understand the variables. Variables are something where the value changes. For example, if I ask you what is your income, you say 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, etc. So here what you see is that the value of income is changing, value from 5,000 to 15, 20, so these are changing. Similarly, if I ask you that what is your level of education, you might say you have done BA or you have done masters, you have done PhD. So here the level of education is a variable because the value of it is changing, BA, MA, PhD. So the value is changing, and these are the variables. So there are different kind of variables, and you have to for any research you have to understand what are the important variables that you want to study, and similarly you will frame the questionnaire. Your questionnaire would be framed on the basis of the kind of variables that you have. Sometimes you can have nominal variables, sometimes you can have ordinal variables, sometimes you might think that interval variables are important. For example, I would like to show you the nominal variables. For example, if I ask you which country do you come from? You will say, I'll give you options like USA, Brazil, India, China, and any other country. So here I'm giving you 4 or 5 options, and these options are nominal. These options are like names, and they are just categories. They cannot be classified in terms of order. They cannot be ordered. So these variables are known as the nominal variables. Then you have ordinal variables. Ordinal variables are those kind of variables where the values can be ordered. For example, what if I ask you what is your monthly income in dollars? You might and I give you options of up to $5,000, $5,001 to $10,000, C $10,001 to $20,000, and D above $20,000. So these are the options, and here you can mark in 1 to mark in 1. So, but keep in mind that here the values or the responses that are there, the options which are there, they can be ordered. They can be ordered in terms of the lesser to higher. So these kind of variables, the ordinal variables, and these kind of structured questionnaires are important if you're planning to do quantitative studies. There, if you plan to say standard deviation, correlation, regression, if you want to use advanced statistics, so in that case, ordinal variables are very, very important, and you have to find a method to quantify the variables, and those quantified variables can be in the form of ordinal variables. So this is the kind of ordinal variables that you have to keep in mind when you frame your questionnaire. And third, some of the variables, third kind of question can be, the responses can be in terms of interval variables. For example, if I ask you how many, what is the average percentage of percentage of children in a city? So you will say 25 to 30%, or what is the age? We can categorize the age into certain age groups. For example, if I categorize the ages of people into say 25 to 30, then 30 to 40, 40 to 45, 45 to 50. So here I'm using the interval variables where there is an interval from 25 to 30, there is an interval, there is a bracket. So this is a third type of variable. So you have to keep in mind that when you're framing your questionnaire for a survey, you have to know that whether your variables can be classified in nominal variables, the ordinal variables, or interval variables. So if you're clear about them, then it's easier to structure the questionnaire, and it's easier to have a structured interview and a structured survey. So this is the method of structuring a questionnaire, and there are certain advantages of a structured questionnaire. First is that the response format is same for all the respondents, because you have distributed a questionnaire, the same questionnaire across the individuals. So the response format is going to be same for all the respondents, and this is indispensable for quantitative kind of analysis. As I told you that if you are planning to have a structured analysis, or if you are planning to have quantitative analysis, in that case your structured questionnaire is more important than the non-structured. Again, if you have huge set of data, if you want to collect huge set of data for fixed set of variables, then the structured questionnaire is more important. And also keep in mind that in the structured format, the respondents can be anonymous. The respondents here, it's possible that you go and personally ask the questions to the respondent, but it's also possible that you do not have to go and meet the person. You can employ the investigator can go and meet the respondent, but also you can simply distribute the questionnaire, and when you collect the questionnaire, and if the questionnaire does not ask the name of the person, so the anonymity can be maintained. You have to devise a method through which anonymity can be maintained even in the structured questionnaire format. So that anonymity is important, because only then the person will give you fearless kind of answer. So that is possible in the structured questionnaire, which is not possible if you have the face-to-face interview. And then if you are planning to compare the responses across the individual, because you have a number of variables, and you can also collect the data from number of places. So if you want to compare the variables across the individual or across the geographical region, so in that case structured questionnaire is better, because you are comparing the responses across the region on the same set of variables. So that is important, that comparison that comes out, which may not be possible if you do, or it will be very difficult if you plan to do non-structured kind of questionnaire. But having said that, let me tell you some of the disadvantages of a structured questionnaire that you have. One of the most important problems with the structured questionnaire is that you are controlling the choices of the person. You are not giving enough options, you are giving just 4 or 5 options. So in that way you are limiting the options of the person. Second is, you are also framing the responses of the respondent, because you are the one who you are the one who frame the questions, and that framing the response creates a problem for the respondent, because what you are thinking and what the respondent is thinking, there might be a difference between these two. So, framing the responses of the respondent might be a problem for unbiased kind of research. Third, there are people who argue that since this survey method is non-participant research method, here the participation, unless until you observe as a participant observer of that culture and society, your research is going to be biased. Mostly anthropologists argue that the non-participant observation as you do in the survey method, so that method is inherently biased, and that method will create a problem in terms of outcome, and that method will not be overcome, the problem will not be overcome unless until you observe a certain event as a participant, and they ask you to go and live with that person, to understand the society, to understand the culture. Here you treat the respondent as your subject, and you have an objective, and you have subjects are the respondents. So, there is a difference between the object and subject. What is missing according to the critiques here is that you do not find the intersubjectivity. So, intersubjectivity comes when two subjects interact among themselves, when two people interact among themselves. In the questionnaire format, you do not measure, or you do not have the method to measure the dialogue or interaction which is taking place between the two subjects. So, that is difficult to measure in the structured kind of questionnaire. So, this is one of the most important critique that has come primarily from anthropologists and some of the historians. Then again, people argue that ethnocentricity is another problem in survey kind of research, because the concepts and the categories which have developed in a different context, they are used to explain the other context, or they are used to understand the other context and the other people and society and culture. So, that otherness is not appreciated in the survey, because you have developed the concepts and the categories which are from a different society, and the same concepts are being used to understand the concepts and the cultures in the other society. So, that might lead to some kind of ethnocentricity, and that creates a problem in the research. And some of the people also argue that this kind of survey based research are superficial researches, and you are forcing the word in horse's mouth. And again, so the people argue that here in the survey method only limited variables can be tested, because you do not have one event can be affected by a number of variables, but in the questionnaire you cannot have all the variables that might affect the outcome. So, in that case, what you do is that you are giving a limited option. So, one of the critiques, one of the problems with this survey method is that you can survey on a very limited number of variables that you have. If you had not given the limited choices, or if you just talk face to face, or if you give the option to respondent to response according to their own preferences and choices. So, in that case, it's very likely that you will get more variables, and you will get more results and more complexities rather than getting from the survey, which gets very simple kind of data. So, these are some of the critiques of this structured questionnaire that you use for the survey. Now, I would like to explain some of the advantages or some of the disadvantages of non-structured questionnaire, which again is used for survey. When you have the open-ended free talk, so you do not go with the questionnaire. You do not prepare a structured questionnaire as you did in the previous method. So, here what you do is that you go with a free mind, although you have in your mind the kind of question and the kind of data that you would like to gather, or the kind of information that you would like to collect from the respondent, but you do not go with the structured kind of format as you did in the previous case. Here you go with open mind, and you talk on a variety of issues, especially where the respondent is more interested, or especially where the respondent is more knowledgeable, where he has more knowledge. So, in this case, you are being guided by the respondent, and not that you are guiding the respondent. So, this is the difference that you have when you have this non-structured questionnaire. And here the respondent is not constrained by the limit of choice. In the structured questionnaire, you gave 4 or 5 options. In the non-structured questionnaire, you do not give 4 options. Since you talk freely to that person, so in that case, that person is willing to share different kind of information with you. So, there you are not testing on just limited variables and limited options. Here you have a range of options and range of variables, which will come into display when you have a free discussion with the respondent. And but keep in mind that if you are planning to have a non-structured questionnaire, so building trust is very important. You have to have interpersonal trust with the respondent. Unless until you develop an interpersonal trust with the respondent, it's not possible to gather the data. It's not possible the respondent will not reveal you the information unless until you have some kind of interpersonal trust. Otherwise, he'll be scared, or he'll take a position which is a public kind of posturing, rather than taking the real, rather than explaining the real things which is inside his mind. So again, if you're planning to have a non-structured questionnaire, because the responses vary across individuals, so in these cases it's very difficult to quantify the responses that you have, because the responses are different for different individuals. So there's no one structure which can categorize all the responses. So as a result, you have different responses, and it cannot be structured, and it's difficult to feed in the computer. The data feeding in the computer becomes difficult, and quantifying becomes again further difficult. And also keep in mind that non-structured questionnaires are very time consuming, and they take a lot of time, and it also takes a lot of resources, because you're expected to go and meet the person individually. So in that, it's very if you're planning to meet 1,000 persons, so it will take months. In that case, it becomes very time consuming, and it also needs a lot of resources, because you have to spend time, you have to travel to different places. So these are some of the disadvantages of non-structured questionnaire. And now I'm moving to sampling. As I told you that the two concepts that you need to learn, survey and sampling. In the survey, surveys are based on some kind of sampling. Surveys are necessarily a kind of sampling, because it's not, I'm not talking the government surveys or the census. In the government surveys and the census, it's possible that you have all the kind of data that you need, or you because the government does a vast census of all the of the entire population. In that, and government has a lot of resources. So in that case, government can go and ask all the entire set of population in the country, but practically it's not possible for a researcher to do that kind of survey. And then what is the need of sampling, and what is the point of doing the research if you're going and meeting all the person? So the sampling is one way out, where you select a number of people or a group of people to predict the behavior of the entire set of population. So sampling is the selection of subset identical and representative of the entire population. Each person in population has equal chance of being selected for the interview. This is very, very important, because if you want to have a random sampling, or if you want to have an unbiased sample, so in that case you have to ensure that every person should have an equal chance of being represented in that sample. Each person should have equal chance of being interviewed in the sample. So that will create the unbiasedness that you need for research. That will make your research more accurate and precise. And this is what is known as randomization of sampling. Randomization means that every person should have equal chance of being selected. So that unless until you randomize, your researches are going to be biased. Sometimes, however, it's possible that you cannot randomize the sampling, you cannot randomize the data. For example, if I want to collect the data on, say, AIDS, or if I want to collect the data on sensitive issues like sexual preferences, in that case, it's not possible to get the data. People are not willing to come out and speak to me and give the information about their sensitive preferences. So in these cases, you may not randomize the data. So in that case, you have to depend upon whatever data you have. For example, if I want to do a survey on, say, AIDS, in that case, I'll try to meet some AIDS patient, but many of the AIDS patients are not willing to share the information with you. So what I'll do is that I'll go meet one person, and from that person, I would like to go. I'll ask that whether he knows the second person who has been infected with AIDS or not. If he has the information, he'll give you the information, and then you go and meet the second person. So this kind of sampling is known as snowball sampling, where the data is not immediately available and the people are not willing to share the information. So this is more like neighborhood approach, that you go to one person or you go to one neighborhood, and from one person you get the information about the other person, then you meet the other person, then you try to know about the third person, fourth person, and so on and so forth. So this kind of sampling is known as snowball sampling. And one important thing to understand is that, and which must be in your mind, I guess, is what should be the size of sample. What would be the right sample for a research, and what should be the right sample so that your research would be unbiased. I think the most important thing to remember here is that there is no fixed sample size, and there is no fixed formula for knowing the exact number of the sample. your sample size would be determined by the time and the resources that you have. Keep in mind that if your data is completely randomized, if your survey is completely randomized, then even with a very small sample, you can get a very accurate picture of the survey. But if your data is not randomized, even if your sample size is very high, your results would be biased. So you have to keep in mind that normally the randomization is the most important thing if you want to have unbiased result. But also keep in mind that since there are human errors, measurement error, and there are different kind of errors which automatically creep into a research, so it's better to have a larger sample size. And also keep in mind that as the sample size increases, the bias decreases. So it's very inverse kind of relationship where the larger sample size and the smaller smaller bias that you have. So you should have a fairly large amount of sample, and that would be determined by the kind of time that you have, your convenience, and your resources. So I'll not give you the exact number that one sample should have, and that's not possible also. This will depend upon a research question. This will also depend upon various things that I told you. So that you have to keep in mind, that convenience, time, resources, these are the important considerations for the number of sample size that you should have. Now, what are the types of sampling that you need to understand? There are different types of sampling which you need to understand for any survey. The first is the simple random sampling. Simple random sampling is the one type of sampling that you have to have. The second is systematic random sampling. Third is stratified sampling, and the fourth is cluster sampling. And I'll go to all these types of sampling one by one, because this is very important and you need to understand for if you're planning to do sampling. The random sampling, for example, first you have to find the complete sampling frame. Sampling frame here would mean you have to have the list of entire population. And keep in mind that in sampling and survey, when I use the term population, the population does not mean the population of the country. What population refers to is the entire set of people that you want to have in your research. For example, if I want to do a research on, say, the students of one particular university, in that case my sampling frame or my population here would be all the number of students which are there in the university. I'm not referring to the population of the country here. Population here means just the total number of students in that university. So you have to have a sampling frame, which means you have to have the list of all the students if you're planning to do a research on the students of a university. Then you have to randomly select, you have to fix the number of people that you are going to select, and then you have to randomly select the number from that population. For example, if there are 5,000 students in a university, and if I want to have 100 as the sample size, so in that case, what I'll do is that I'll prepare all the list of all the students, entire list of all the students, and then from there I'll find a method to randomly pick up 100 students. There are 2-3 methods that you can randomize from the list. One is that either you ask the computer to generate a random sample, or you mix up all the names in a box and then pick up 100 samples. So that way you can also randomize the sample. So this is the simple random sampling, but the better method where you can randomize sample in a better way is the systematic random sampling. So for that, what you need to have, you have to, for example, if I want to draw a sample size of 100 from a list of, say, 5,000 students in a university. So in that case, what I'll do is that I want to sample 1 out of every 50 students, because you have 5,000 students and you have to have a sample of 100. So you want to interview 1 in every 50 students. So in that case, what I'll do is that here generating the first number is important. So from 1 to 50, I'll pick up the one random number. It can be any number. It can be any number from 1 to 50. Suppose I pick up 22 as the first number. So in that case, that becomes my first random number of the sample. And then what I'll do is that I'll add 50 to that, and then the second random number for me becomes 22 plus 50, which is 72. And third number will become 72 plus 50, which is 122, and the fourth number is 172, and so on. So this way I create a systematic random sampling. So this is more important, and there are chances that this is better than the simple random sampling if you want to randomize your data. So once you have done that, then you have to create a list of 100 students per sample, and then you go and ask the person and do the survey. So this is the systematic random sampling that is useful, very useful for structured kind of sampling that you do. Third is stratified sampling. Here the sampling frame includes a variety of categories. For example, there are people from different age groups, there are people from different sexes, and there are people who are different religious groups. And keep in mind that the responses will vary across these subgroups, and you have to draw samples from each of these subgroups, and these subgroups are a strata, and that is the reason it's called a stratified sampling, and it's useful to collect proportionate stratified sample. Here one example is important because in all the universities normally you have nearly 50% students, 50% male and 50% female. So in that case, if you're planning to do a survey, what you'll do is that in your survey you'll include 50% male and 50% female. But suppose in your university there are only 30% female and 70% male. So in the sample you'll have 70% male and 30% female. So that is proportionate stratified sampling. That is important because unless until you this is one of the methods to control the variation. This is one of the methods to randomize the sample. So you have to have proportional representation of different strata in terms of age, different strata in terms of sex, different strata in terms of income, religion, and other variables. So you have to understand that stratified sampling is very important to randomize your sampling to minimize your biases. And the next sampling is the cluster sampling. For example, this can be best understood by the example. So suppose if you want to study the incidence of malaria in India, so what do? You can divide India into different zones, which can be east, west, north, and south. These are the 4 zones, and then from each zone you randomly select a few districts. After selecting, even the districts can be further randomized by say that you can choose some of the districts which are in the northern part of the state. You can choose a few districts from the southern, and you can choose some district from the western. So through this method you are randomizing the sample, but you have to go for further stratification because districts consist of cities and villages. So there cities and villages again you have to randomize in terms of you have to pick up villages from different parts of the district, so that your sample is properly randomized. And even when you go to the villages or the cities, you have to randomize the households, because in India or in many of the societies, there are certain caste groups which live in a certain kind of in village they live in the center, in the cities also they live in the center, and the poorer people live in the outskirts. So in that case, what you do is that you have to randomize the household. So there are different stages of stratification, which starts from the top level, which is the country, and it goes down to the state level, then it goes down to the district level, and then it goes down further to the state and the city level. So you have to create a stratification at various stages and at various levels. So through this, the purpose, what is the purpose of stratification? The purpose here is again the same. The purpose, through this you are controlling the variation, you are trying to randomize your sample, so that every person from different strata, from different clusters, they get representation into your sample. So this is one of the methods to stratify and cluster your sampling. Now let me take you to the measurement bias. No matter how much of efforts you put into your research will have some kind of bias. This can be due to human errors, this can be the way you frame your questions, this can be the way you order your questions, this can also be because you have failed to randomize your sample. So these are some of the methods that you come to, these are some of the things that you need to know, because these are the kind of biases that might come into your research. And some of the measuring concepts can be difficult, and that's the reason some of the measurement errors might come into your research. Now the next stage is organizing and analyzing the data. This is very important. Once you have collected the data, you have to know the methods to analyze and organize the data. For that you need to learn statistics, and some of the basic stats are very important, especially if you are planning to have a quantitative data. So the descriptive statistics you have to understand. Here it includes frequency distribution, Here it includes, you might have heard of measuring the central tendency, which is mean, median, and mode. Mean is the average, median is the 50th percentile, and mode is the most frequent number. So these are some of the methods through which you can measure the central tendency of the data. And then you have to measure the variation and the standard deviation, and then if you want to do further analysis, you can use correlation regression. These are the advanced techniques that you need to learn from the stats. And some of the softwares which are very useful, which you need to learn, are the softwares like SPSS, Stata, and SAS. So these are softwares that you need to learn. And quickly, I'll finish this, some of the critiques of the survey method. One of the most important critique of survey method is that it takes individual as a unit. In a hierarchical society like India, the views of a village headman is not same as the ordinary villager. So that difference is not taken into account in this kind of survey. And again, the opinion of the husband is not same as the opinion of the wife. So this is another problem that might creep into a survey method. And aggregation of individuals' opinion may not be same as the group's opinion. This is another problem with the survey method. And it's impossible to collect the data on all the types of variables. So these are some of the problems that you have to understand. And again, one of the most important critique is that the behaviorist method, which they use survey method, they try to homogenize the unit, they try to homogenize the individual and the culture. So that is one of the criticism that has come from the other people, and this has created this is one of the things that you have to keep in mind while you do your survey method. So with this, I come to the conclusion of my presentation here, and I hope that you learned some of the methods which are used in sampling, survey, and the formatting the questionnaire, framing the questionnaire. So these are some of the things that I wanted to tell you, and thank you so much. I hope you like my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, well, I explained survey and sampling. So survey and sampling both are kind of data collection methods.
Yeah.
So when one should go for the survey and when one should go for the sampling process?
We have to keep in mind that survey and sampling are not different. We have to understand that sampling is a method to do a survey. Survey normally means that you have to go and meet all the person. That is practically impossible. So what you do is that you have to select a sample. Since you cannot survey the entire population, then you have to select a sample, and as I explained you the method of selecting the sample, so you can select a sample and do the survey. So survey is the process, and sampling is the method through which you create a subgroup for the entire population.
Okay, but in a small population, you can go for the all survey.
Yeah. For example,
that is also called census.
Yes. Yeah. For example, as I told you that if you are planning to study, say, the behavior of the AIDS patient, so in that case, your sample size is very small. Yeah. In that case, you don't need to do a survey. Your sample size is so small that you can practically go and meet all the person. For that, you do not need sampling. So that is another possibility that you can have in your research.
Okay. So these sampling also differ according to our research types. Like there are some research, pure research, applied research, action research, experiment research.
Yeah.
So that differs the methods which we take almost same in all this kind of research.
Yes, we have to keep in mind that survey method is not useful for all kind of researches. It has certain limitations, and survey is useful only when you're planning to do empirical kind of research. Empirical, which can be observed, and which you can have the data qualitative or quantitative, but observation is very important. But there are certain normative kind of researches, and there are certain philosophical kind of researches where observation is not possible. For example, if I want to if I want to study the democratic norms in a society, or the value system of a person, of an individual, so in that case, I would not like to do an empirical kind of research. That kind of research would be more like normative rather than empirical kind of research. So for that, you have to have a different kind of method rather than the survey or the sampling method.
Which method do we follow in normative and philosophical?
Yes, that's a very important question. If you have normative and philosophical questions, so there are certain other methods which can be useful. One method which is can be, for example, the narrative method, narrative style, where the method is not empirical in the sense that there you are more focusing on the dialogue between the two subjects, and the dialogue and the interaction which takes place between the two subjects, that becomes important. And in the normative researches also, you have to find other methods of descriptive research rather than empirical kind of research, because you cannot quantify the data. you cannot observe the norms of a person. So these are some of the things that you have. It has to be more on intuition. It has to be more on the kind of the kind of the indirect observation that you do with the people or with the society. So indirect observation becomes important. But in survey, you have to have direct observation, that you are interacting with the respondent through questionnaire or through personal interviews. So there the observation is indirect. So that is different kind of method. And again, I'd also like to tell the audience that the other methods of observation are the one is the direct observation, and the third is experimental method. So one is empirical research, but observation can be of three types. One is survey, second is this observation, and third is experiment. So many of the scientists, for example in biology or physics, they generate data, but they do not generate data through survey. They generate data through experiment. They do experiments in the lab, in the laboratory, and through that they generate the data. So that is another method of collecting the data and collecting the information and the attributes about the person or society or the physical, some physical things.
Okay. So for a normative or philosophical, we generally follow normative method or historical method.
Yes. Yeah. Some of the other methods that are useful, and I would just like to point out, because I do not have time to elaborate on all of them. Historical method is again very important, that how the norms have changed over the time, and it has to be linear and non-linear kind of research. And some of the philosophies are not really empirical. For example, the entire philosophy of Bert Anderson, that is okay, that's based on some kind of observation, but that is more like philosophical, where there are different methods to do research, and this is not related to your survey method that we learned in the today's lecture.
Okay. So it depends upon according to case to case.
Yeah, it depends upon case to case. The most important thing, that what kind of research method you should use, that should be determined by the research question that you have in your mind. You have to determine whether your research question is empirical or normative or philosophical. So that will determine what kind of research you intend to do. So the research question is the most important. Sometimes you'd also like to do a case study, for example. So just there are limited set of people, and you do case study rather than broader the cross-sectional or longitudinal survey. So case study is again one method which is used by anthropologists. And again, keep in mind that if you're planning to historical research, so in historical research you cannot go into history and do the survey. So for historical research, you will not need the survey, because you cannot go and ask the person, the historical persons. You cannot go and ask Akbar, for example, why did he had certain kind of secular policy. So historical researches will be completely different. Again, anthropological researches are different, and as I told you, the philosophical and normative researches are they use different techniques.
Yeah, it also differ sorry, as per the purpose of the research. Like some research just will explain the things, some are will find new things. And
yes, you are right. There are two types of researches. One is descriptive, and other type of research is explanatory. So descriptive, you are describing in terms of what is happening, and maybe sometimes you include how is it happening. But if your research is explanatory, if you want to explain, so you have to explain in terms of cause and effect. You have to explain that why X is leading to Y, and what are the reasons for a particular outcome. So when you're trying to explain, you have to explain in terms of why. You have to explain the causes. The cause and effect relationship becomes important here, and that's why sometimes you use the term teleological. So that kind of scientific research has to be in terms of causes and effect. But there are certain other researches, as I told you, which are descriptive, and then you have certain research, especially in literature, you have narrative style of research. So there are different methods of research, but that will be determined by the research question that you have in your mind.
okay. So, well, friend, today we came to know very important aspect of the research, that is survey and sampling. Tomorrow we'll discuss another topic of research with the same resource person, Dr. Rajan Kumar. So I hope today the lecture must have benefited you and given a kind of insight with which you can follow your research. So with this word we conclude the lecture. I thank all of you for watching the lecture. On our behalf, I thank Dr. Rajan Kumar for giving such a wonderful lecture on research method. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.